Assalamu alaikum, everyone. This is Murtha Zakwaja, Legal and Policy Director with CARE Georgia. Good evening, and thank you for joining us here today. I'm pleased to be joined with two of my friends and two of CARE Georgia's friends, our former Executive Director and now CARE National Deputy Director, Edward Ahmed Mitchell, and Immigration Attorney and Partner at AntiImmigration, Hiba Ghalib. Thank you both for joining us today. I think you both are still on mute. You'll have to unmute.
I blame you all for these. You said to mute ourselves. Assalamu alaikum. How are you, Mortis? Good to see you.
Assalamu alaikum. I'm sure you guys are all used to reading, lips by now. Everybody's.
I mean, really, at this point, yeah, you can start to develop a bit of a talent.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking about a very important issue today, the Trump administration's proclamation, which expanded immigration restrictions on April 22nd. So thank you for everyone who's joining us, all our viewers. Please do let us know where you're tuning in from. If you have questions, include it in the chat and we'll be sure to get to them. But before we get to that, I just wanted to ask, we're in the midst of Ramadan, a very special time, very particular time where we're facing difficulties unlike any that we faced in the past. So I wanted to ask both of you how your Ramadan's going, how your families are handling it, and what you feel is sort of helping you get through this month and make the most of it. Hiba, I'll start off with you.
Yeah, sure. I've been trying to focus on the positives. Actually, I feel like this Ramadan, yes, it's different, but in a way, I've never had an opportunity to have, quiet and less distraction. And I think I was telling somebody, I think sometimes that as much as I miss going to the masjid, especially in Ramadan, I felt like I was using it almost as a crutch. And now it's just me, and I have to figure out what my way of worship and reflection and, in solitude really looks like. And so I feel, alhamdulillah, that's for me a bright spot in this month. And as much as it's difficult being away from family and friends, and sometimes it's a little too much, too much socialization. And I think this year it's the quiet is actually, helping me hear myself and my relationship, inshallah, with, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, hopefully is going to be strengthened with that.
Inshallah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, for me, it's, so much has been going on this month in terms of work at CARE, civil rights issues, fundraising. We've been making an effort to help the community navigate the COVID-19 crisis, setting up these new websites and a daily television program that, that has almost overwhelmed so much of my attention. And I'm not sure how different it would have been if I was physically going into an office every day, if it would have been the same. And then not being able to go to the masjid at night, at some point you almost feel like work can start to take over your whole day because you don't have that moment when you're in a mosque. You have to put your phone away. It's like you're constantly accessible and you feel that pull to, constantly see what's going on. So for me, I think I'm going to, inshallah, try to make sure the last 2 weeks of Ramadan, I'm, able to focus a little more throughout the day, not just at night, inshallah, on worship and getting the benefits of Ramadan. But may Allah count, our work as a form of worship and count it in our favor. So alhamdulillah, the other thing I would say is it's nice being with family all the time. Maybe my wife doesn't feel the same way, but alhamdulillah, it's nice to be around the wife and the baby and, throughout the day, and to not be cut off from them and to have that Ramadan experience with them throughout the whole month. So alhamdulillah, hidden blessings, mashallah.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah, I think a lot of our viewers are probably facing similar situations with their family. So it's heartwarming to hear about, sort of the positives we can take from this month and the difficulties we're facing, sort of the positive outlook we have there. So thank you both for sharing that. As I introduced before, we're going to be talking about the latest President Trump's executive order, which expanded immigration restrictions. So Hiba, I'm just going to start off with you here. What did this travel ban do? What did this travel expansion do? Who did it ban? Who does it apply to?
Sure. So this was the proclamation that was issued by the White House on April 22nd, went into effect on the 23rd. I can tell you who it applies to, but it's actually easier just to tell you it doesn't apply to, because then people can start to hopefully, rule out. I think a lot of people are worried, and I get a lot of questions about it. So I can start with that, and then kind of summarize, I guess, at the end who is left, because it really doesn't apply to many people. It's not going to apply to people that are currently in the United States or were in the U.S. on that date when it was released or when it went into effect. It does not apply, so regardless of their status. And then it doesn't apply to people who are permanent residents, even if they are outside of the U.S. or who have an approved immigrant visa prior to the issuance of the proclamation or the effective date. It doesn't apply to beneficiaries of EB-5 visas, so investor visas. And again, these are investor visas typically take a few years. So if somebody's invested and they're applying for their immigrant visa based on that, this was a process that has already started years ago. So it's not someone that will be able to apply in the future. But of course, if this gets extended beyond the 60-day validity date, which is currently in effect, then that may be something to look into. But right now, it's they don't apply to it doesn't apply to investors. Obviously, I think the reason is because this is technically or supposedly to help with the current economic situation that's caused by the healthcare crisis, COVID-19 pandemic, and so obviously investors wouldn't necessarily directly impact that, presumably. The other categories, asylees, wouldn't be affected by this proclamation. So if someone is applying for asylum status in the U.S., is already here, or is approved for refugee status abroad, it wouldn't impact them. Of course, that's already been significantly restricted under our administration anyway. It basically really applies mainly for, it doesn't apply for non-immigrants. So people, let's say with a visitor visa or student visa, it does apply though to people that are applying for immigrant visas. So unless they are specifically within two categories of family-based immigration, which are parents of spouses of US citizens or children under 21, minor children under 21 of US citizens applying to reunite with their family members, any other family member, any other immigrant visa application aside from the ones we've listed, meaning application for a green card from a consulate abroad, those are all restricted under the proclamation. So for example, if a US citizen wants to petition for their parent or for their sibling to enter the US in the future, that's currently banned under this proclamation.
Thank you for that. And as Hiba just explained, there's a large number of people who this does not apply to, but there are some that it absolutely does apply to. And this ban was actually implemented following a very ominous tweet that we saw on President Trump's Twitter, I think 11 p.m. the night before. So Edward, I'd love to ask you about, we've seen the president tweet out this type of rhetoric against immigrants. Not just, this isn't something new, we've seen this since his campaign back in 2015 for the 2016 election cycle. How concerning is it that we have a president who continues to espouse anti-immigrant rhetoric on his Twitter, one, and then two, when it comes out in policies, what type of effect does that have on immigrant populations here in America?
Sure, yeah, good question. So, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulullah. President Trump's tweets are always concerning, but never particularly surprising. I think what was very disturbing about his original tweet was he said he was going to shut down all immigration in the United States. And I think for many of us, when we read that, we obviously didn't know, number one, whether or not to take him seriously. Number two, what that exactly would mean. If, for example, you were so concerned about COVID-19 that you wanted to shut down all travel to the United States, if that's what he meant, okay, that's one thing. But that clearly couldn't have been what he meant because, number one, at the same time he tweeted that, he was pushing for us to reopen our economy. So clearly whatever he was saying wasn't about protecting the health of anyone, right? Number two, the idea of shutting down all travel to the United States would just be impractical at that point, and there would have been more planning that went into it. So we just assumed that this was going to be something racist, something bigoted, or something that is symbolically meant to be as bigoted as possible. And I think that's what it is. The reason that it doesn't apply to many, many people, including people in the United States, and has so many exceptions that I think it really is President Trump attempting once again to send a message to anti-immigrant bigots who support him that, hey, I'm looking to keep as many people of color out of the country as I can. And he even made these remarks about farm workers, having their jobs threatened by overseas immigration, which is not true at all. It's ludicrous. And so I think when we see, bans like this, immigration bans like this, that seem to make no sense whatsoever, that will have no impact on protecting us from the virus and no impact on protecting American jobs, the only explanation is that President Trump simply has a problem with immigration and is trying to use it, as a political wedge, a political tool to make people in his base, far-right members of his base, think he's doing something to limit immigration in the United States. It's sad that immigrants and people looking to come here for school and for work to join their families are being used as political footballs. But again, this is not surprising. He's been doing it now for almost 4 years. The only question now is how long will this particular ban last? What happens when court challenges start occurring? Does he back off? Does he dig in? That's what I'm curious about, whether or not he extends this past the 60 days and what happens at that point.
And just to add to that, we talked about who this applies to, but we didn't really talk about the fact that really practically speaking, it doesn't really change anything because no one's coming into the US currently anyway. There is no travel. The consulates are closed. Even people that have potential immigrant visa applications pending, they're all stalled currently due to the pandemic. And so I think, as Edward mentioned, that this is definitely just a way to take advantage of a very difficult situation and promote an agenda that we already knew was already there to restrict legal immigration. I mean, there's no other explanation. Unfortunately, it's wasting the resources of people that should be focusing on the actual problem and the ways to help ease the strain on the economy rather than all these dubious attempts to come up with just irrational policies that really aren't solving the problem. I mean, it shows that really he's focused more on his agenda rather than actually solving the problem that we're facing. And immigrants are, of course, his favorite scapegoat, his favorite group to blame and to constantly target when it comes to irrational policy.
Right. It's like he's thinking of what are all the things I can do except for the things that would actually solve the health crisis that we're facing. Right. Pippa's spot on. Yeah.
Meanwhile, hurting immigrants, double, basically 2 birds, 1 stone.
And this isn't necessarily even the only policy we've seen that has been implemented during the pandemic that has targeted immigrants or that has been harmful to immigrants. People who had spouses who were immigrants who weren't citizens weren't eligible to receive or didn't have social security number weren't eligible to receive stimulus check. As well as undocumented people weren't eligible to receive those as well. As we know, immigrants are make up a larger percentage than they actually are of the country of essential workers. There are more immigrants in healthcare positions and also in other essential worker positions, which are the workers that still have to actually work. So they're the ones that are risking their lives when we reopen the economy and work.
Right. And we're telling them they can't bring their, if they're an adult US citizen, they can't bring their adult children here, their parents here, their siblings here, if they want to come immigrate here anymore. And so all these people are risking their lives in hospitals and other settings, we're telling them, oh, by the way, your family, they're not good enough to come here months from now through the normal immigration process.
Right. And I mean, I think, again, you brought up a great point along with Edward that this actual ban isn't necessarily affecting that many people because we don't have travel into the United States. But when President Trump issued this, he made a few claims that are, again, go against the facts and aren't things that actually happen. So I want to just bring those up with both of you now so we can address that for the community and we can say, these are things that aren't actually true. One of the things that President Trump claimed was that we must be mindful of the impact of foreign workers on the United States labor market, particularly in an environment of high domestic unemployment and depressed demand for labor, suggesting that immigrant and foreign workers are taking away American jobs. We, just by the numbers, we know 12% of the American workforce is immigrants, no more than that, which is a small percentage of the workforce. But when we see this type of language, what does this mean for the immigrant population who are actually serving in these roles? You know, what are they supposed to do when they, or how are they supposed to react when their president is castigating their role in the economy like this?
Sure. Just a quick, I just want to mention it quickly because I don't think a lot of people were aware, but 2 months ago, or 3 now almost, in February, late February, we were, there's a current policy, a current regulation that went into effect that significantly restricted under the public charge rule, legal immigration based on financial ability. And so this is actually a rule that's not new. It just added additional requirements and restrictions and made it a lot more difficult for people to apply for any immigration benefit if they had any concern, if the government had any concern or potential concern for them becoming a public charge or relying on the government for benefits. Meaning anybody that's currently in the US, they're pretty much, unless they're asylees or very, very small exceptions and very small percentage of our legal immigration system currently, they are required to show financial ability. So that's not something, people are not immigrating and applying for welfare the next day. This isn't how it works. Our system's actually designed, and it's not a new rule, but it's just become more strictly enforced. Our system is designed to allow only immigrants that can support themselves through them and their own families. And not to mention the fact that it's a myth that immigrants do not put in a strain on the economy. In fact, historically, even refugee communities, you can see a lot of immigrant communities are entrepreneurs, and a lot of them are investing in growing jobs, growing the economy by creating jobs. And so these are the, I think we all already know that just by knowing who our neighbors are, who owns the shops that we go shopping at, locally, or restaurants that we enjoy. We see the types of people that are running our businesses in our own communities, and we know they are immigrants, but somehow there's a disconnect, and we can, easily make it so that people fall into this trap of feeling like, okay, if they're immigrating to the US, they must be coming to take a job that they couldn't get back home, but we aren't considering the possibility that maybe they're creating jobs for people, or perhaps they're taking a job that no one else can do, because again, that is another requirement if they're coming based on employment, that they're only taking a job that no one else can do. And ask anybody in Silicon Valley, I mean, we can't run these. I mean, Zoom probably is the only reason we're able to use this is because we've got people in tirelessly working under H-1B visas that are IT professionals that are able to make sure that this current influx on our infrastructure, the webinar infrastructure, I guess the internet now, how we've all transitioned now to operating in this way. It was technically, I mean, if you think about it, it was pretty seamless given how quickly the demand basically became prevalent. And so I think we have to realize, like, really what behind the scenes, immigrants really are the reason why we can continue to operate, whether it's, again, a restaurant that we want to continue to enjoy food from, or the technology that we enjoy. These are the people, again, and essential workers. You mentioned a lot of them also are, from the immigrant communities, people that are willing and able, even people picking our crops, honestly, I think is something people don't realize. A lot of those workers are from the immigrant communities that we need to continue for our economy to continue to thrive. And so unfortunately, it's a distraction when we waste our time blaming them and assuming that they're taking our jobs. We're really not focusing on the actual problem, which is a lot harder to do, obviously, because it's a disaster, and it's a very difficult, unprecedented, disaster. But at the same time, it's not caused by immigrants, and so we shouldn't blame them or waste our time and actually solve the problem head on, rather than waste our time.
Yeah, Hippie's right. I mean, the irony is that so many aspects of the American economy are dependent on immigrants. If every immigrant suddenly just snapped away, Thanos snapped them all away, the American economy would collapse. If you didn't have immigrants from the medical profession all the way to the farming, the they don't hurt the American economy. The American economy depends on immigrants in almost every aspect that I can think of. So what President Trump is saying is not only just idiotic. It doesn't make sense. It's actually the opposite of what he is describing. He's actually, if he were to go through with trying to limit the ability of immigrants to come here in the long term to work, to go to school, he would actually be causing damage to the American economy, not helping. And we've seen this before when states impose very strict, anti-immigrant bills, like driver's license bills, things of that nature. Then many Latino communities started avoiding going to the area to avoid racial profiling. And of course, also undocumented immigrants went elsewhere. And you suddenly saw shortages, companies saying, no, we need work. We don't have people to do these important jobs, especially in the farming industry and picking crops and such things. And so again, the problem will exist if President Trump goes through with this in the long term. It's not a solution he's offering.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other things is coupled with immigrants being left out, and especially undocumented immigrants being left out of any legislation that's providing benefits or providing assistance for people who are affected by COVID-19, is putting them at risk. And while they, as you both have demonstrated, and as we all know, they're an essential part of our economy. So when you're ignoring them and you're making them, marginalizing them, that remains a part of your community. You're marginalizing a part of your community, and you're endangering the entire community by doing so.
And if I also, just to add, because I don't know if people realize this, because we always think of immigration as family-based, people applying for their parents and, children, and even employment-based. When we talk about immigration, there's actually a large portion of our immigration current policies are aimed towards people that have advanced degrees that can help, enhance our workforce in ways that we are currently, limited. We want to have the people with, the PhDs and the public health that maybe can help contribute to our, attempts to battle this current situation. And so we don't, we want to be at the cutting edge of this. And sometimes it means having this be a global process, including people from other countries, not necessarily only, US born and raised, scientists and academics can you need to have that ability to have the flow of knowledge, to be able to continue to remain competitive.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to ask Hiba, are we seeing any types of cases, or is CUC seeing any type of cases related to this ban or any of other of President Trump's policies towards immigrants during the pandemic? And Edward, I also wanted to ask after that, what is CARE doing to address this? What work have they been doing? Have they been seeing cases where people are being discriminated on the basis of being Muslims related to this ban or to any other of these anti-immigrant policies we've seen during this pandemic?
As far as, like I said, really the practical impact of this particular proclamation is very minimal. The only thing that has come up, though, are people that had a plan, for example, US citizens that either recently became US citizens or recently decided they wanted to petition for parents or other family members to be able to join them in the US now won't be able to. And so these are people that are trying to explore maybe other options or, changing their plans. But there is something I will say, and some people maybe watching are familiar with the process or are interested for themselves. It's a two-step process to petition for your parent. For example, there's a filing of a petition first, and that's filed here in the US with the USCIS. That petition can still go forward. And so that's not restricting USCIS from continuing to adjudicate those petitions. The question it becomes when that gets approved and sent over to the US consulate for them to apply for their immigrant visa, what is the current status of that ban? If it's still, if it's still in effect, how is that going to impact their ability to immigrate based on that approved petition? That's the question we're not going to know until we know what will happen with that once that 60 days passes. But currently, if they are in line to get an appointment for an immigrant visa and they're not within the exceptions that we discussed, they wouldn't be able to, they're basically not going to get a visa. They'll be on hold, just as people impacted by the travel ban, from that we've seen, and how it's taken effect is really people are in administrative processing, pretty much either denied outright or just on hold for indefinitely, really. But one thing that is cause for concern, by the way, that I don't think we realize yet the impact. As much as we're talking about how this impacts people that are applying for immigrant visas, but not really, because there really aren't people traveling currently anyway, and consulates are closed. There will be people that will apply for non-immigrant visas in the future that could be impacted under this proclamation, under this catch-all at the end of the proclamation that kind of made it sound like the administration or the executive branch was ordering the consulates from the Department of State to consider applicants for non-immigrant visas. So we're talking student visas, visitor visas. There is a high likelihood that's going to get a lot harder because of this proclamation, because it gave kind of permission for them to say, hey, if you want to hold off on issuing those, that's fine with us, kind of thing. So we're not yet seeing obviously the impacts of this, because there aren't any immigrant visas or non-immigrant visas going forward currently, but I have a feeling we're going to see a severe restriction in the future on those types of visa applications as well, even though technically they're not falling directly within this. So we'll see how that works. And if that happens, then there's not a lot we can do about it.
And Mortez, to answer your question, so at the national level, I don't know of any active legal cases that have been sparked by this executive order. I'm sure that people have, reached out just to express concern and find out how it would impact them. And in most cases, it probably, as we described, doesn't. So at this point, with COVID-19, no one's really going anywhere. So I think we won't really see the impact of this, if any at all, until a few months from now, if it's extended, and people are able, or if the health crisis abates, people are able to travel again and get back to their normal lives, and then they want to start immigrating here, and then this ban is still in place. That's when I think you might see, legal actions and more complaints coming in. Right now, no one's going anywhere anyway, so we're just kind of in a holding pattern.
Yeah. Do you think this could be sort of something that's added on or that's addressed in the No Ban Ever Act?
Yeah, I mean, quite possibly. I mean, the legislation was supposed to have been brought before the House a few months ago, but it was delayed in part because of the emergency action taken to respond to the coronavirus economic collapse. And so the House has yet to pass the No Ban Ever Act, which would overturn President Trump's Muslim ban and limit the ability of future presidents to impose such a ban. So that's certainly something that could be worth considering. The interesting question will be, given that the Supreme Court has already ruled that President Trump has extensive authority to impose travel restrictions, immigration restrictions by country, even though the Muslim ban was clearly motivated by anti-Muslim bigotry, it seems that he would, based on the current makeup of the Supreme Court, get away with this new ban. But that doesn't mean you don't fight it as hard as you can and as far up the chain as you can and see what happens. So legislation or a change, in the White House is probably the only way to, in the short term, to undo these policies, these immigration orders, unless President Trump voluntarily decides to do it himself.
And this is a question for both of you. What new policies or what policies can be put in place to, one, obviously, over time of xenophobia and anti-immigrant rhetoric?
Well, I think it's really hard to say right now. We have to focus on making sure that our current law is being applied fairly and correctly, and it's not. Oftentimes, people experience immigrants or advocates, assisting with, legal immigration processes, find protracted, delays, unfair arbitration, arbitrary denials, basically, however the government has been able to cut corners and make sure they, adjudicate either cases either by by just improperly denying it, or making it impossible for people to jump through hoops, basically, to be able to accomplish their goal in following the rules. I think that would be the best thing that we could do, is helping people battle that, because that's going to be something that isn't going to go away anytime soon. It's even the simplest case can take either more time and make make it a lot more difficult than it ever was. And every day we've been seeing that. Every day we find decisions that are completely ridiculous and arbitrary and just unfathomable, really. And so we have to constantly challenge that by appeals and just following the appellate process, but also to Edward's point, I think eventually we're going to be seeing a lot of lawsuits, and this is something that isn't new. We have resorted to litigation, federal court litigation, in our practice a lot more than we ever have before. And so anytime there is an arbitrary denial, or a case takes too long, and we know that that's just that's because it's basically almost a punishment, I would say, for somebody, we would help represent them in suing the government to make sure that their cases are getting adjudicated fairly and quickly, and apply the law the way it should, the way it was intended under the Immigration Nationality Act. So lawsuits and continuing to push for policies that really make sense and apply the law the way it should, but also obviously there are a lot of still gaps in our current laws, and so pushing for immigration reform, however that may be, that's, I think, going to be the challenge, because currently there obviously very different views on how our immigration laws need to change, but I think everybody does agree that they do need to change. And so that's something that we can have conversations about with our own representatives and lawmakers, just so they realize the impact of our laws really aren't helping anybody, not the immigrants, not our communities, not our government, or our nation overall. But in the meantime, just making sure that the law gets applied fairly and correctly, I think is as a practitioner, I think that's what we can do.
Can I ask, Borges, can I ask him a question? I was curious to learn more about how the COVID-19 crisis, not even necessarily President Trump's order, but the crisis impacting your ability to handle your active cases, the people who are currently detained, or people who are, here, in undocumented status, and they have to check in. I'm curious, how is the crisis impacting the active cases, your ability to go to court? Are court sessions still happening at the same pace, not happening at all?
Yeah, so I mean, furthermore, like all courts, pretty much non-detained has basically been shut down. So anything, anybody in removal proceedings that had a hearing, I think they're supposed to be reopening May 15th or May. I think they delayed it again. They keep delaying it, but they were really slow, by the way, to close. Once they did close, they had a short period, but they kept extending it. But non-detained are essentially on hold currently. The detained docket, because we have obviously people in detention facilities that are in removal proceedings, that isn't being that isn't on hold, but it is being currently going a different route with a lot more telephonic hearings. I know that people still do go to court representing their clients in person. It is discouraged, because I know that there was a case or two here in Atlanta that somebody that was COVID positive had the disease and was in court and exposed themselves and the people around them to unfortunately to corona. And so we've heard that in our community going around. So we're currently encouraging each other in our communities. Normally we prefer not to do telephonic hearings, but I've had one recently, and I think they've eased the requirements for us to request them. They've allowed us to file things now electronically, which was never the case before. We were kind of old school in immigration court, and so everything had to be done in person. And nowadays it's kind of transitioning to less of that. But there is, court's still in session. There's judges still on the bench. Unfortunately, there's detainees that we're trying to fight for because of their unfortunately added susceptibility. Obviously, they're in close quarters. There's no way they can be safely separated from one another, given the fact that there's pretty much everybody's in this building together, exposing each other to whatever it is that they have. It's pretty much a guarantee that anything one person catches is going to spread throughout the building. And so has been a push for people that have higher, I guess, susceptibility or concern of pre-existing conditions, health conditions, that they be released from detention, and we're pushing that with our own clients. Some of them are on the border and they have been denied bond or haven't been released because they either they're too young or they're healthy or whatever the case may be. But I mean, we're still pushing for it, and I know there was a lawsuit. I don't believe it was successful here in Georgia for detainees to be released because of their potential exposure. But aside from that, immigration in general is still going forward in terms of the filings. The deadlines got extended a little bit, but USCIS, a lot of the kind of the administrative stuff that gets really processed virtually anyway, because we file things for people, adjudicators, or a lot of them work remotely anyway, and so that hasn't really stopped. I'm sure it slowed down significantly because now they all had to transition to working remotely, but that's pretty much going forward. What has stopped, though, of course, is interviews. So there are no USCIS interviews currently going on. So citizenship is getting delayed. Applicants applying for permanent residency are obviously seeing delays. So there's, I mean, it's a whole different world, but at the same time it is for everybody. So I think the biggest challenge, though, for us, it's we can't just stop working, and unfortunately people, especially the clients that we represent that are detained, those are the ones that we are worried about the most, because they're, while everybody's, kind of thinking, oh, well, the courts are closed and, they're no longer going to be pursuing removal proceedings against them. Well, they are if they're detained. So it's just going to end up prolonging their detention if they're not going to be able to actually remove people, which is a concern, obviously, that has us exploring habeas options to allow people, to force the government to release people based on that, because unlawful detention, as is in our Constitution, is a huge problem currently with our situation. So we're seeing it on all ends, but at the same time, I think everybody is. It's just a very unique kind of way it impacts clients, I think, depending on what their current situation is.
Gotcha.
And then, so Edward, I just wanted to end then with, one more after this, but CARE National has been at the forefront of this fight against the travel bans, and against a lot of this, and has spoken out against a lot of the xenophobic rhetoric that President Trump has been espousing. What would they want to see? What does CARE National want to see happen? Change in policies, change in legislation, both on an immigration front and then also in the rhetoric that's being used in Congress. What changes would they like to see made?
So I think in terms of the Muslim ban, everyone knows our position, which is obviously opposition to the Muslim ban. At the same time, though, I think we have to be careful that, if we pursue a legislative recourse to end the Muslim ban, that we don't end up within that legislation legitimizing and formalizing immigration practices that are problematic. So, for example, you want to be careful about a language about national security exceptions, allowing some future president, something in writing that would allow him to do something like the Muslim ban if he actually did, in his mind, have a more legitimate reason to do it. Our position is there should really never be a time when you're banning everyone from a country from coming to the United States, period, without considering any exceptions. It's hard and difficult to imagine a scenario in which that is the case. Even in the in the midst of COVID-19, the travel ban on China had exceptions, had some consideration for people who may need to come here for some legitimate reason, have some clear connection in the United States, and can go through a proper medical screening process. So I think that the best case scenario would be if the Muslim ban is simply overturned at the presidential level. So there doesn't have to even be any legislation, even the risk of passing some sort of bill, something in a law that potentially creates an outcome, a bad outcome down the line you didn't expect. For something like DACA, on the other hand, it would be ideal if there was legislation putting that into place so that DACA, people who are beneficiaries of DACA, would not be subject to the whims of whoever happens to be president, every 4 years. So it really depends on which immigration order we're talking about. So that is what I would say, our broader goal is that the Muslim ban would be overturned if it has to be, through legislation, since the court route did not work. If that doesn't work, then we would hope that a president or this president would overturn it eventually. The other thing to note is that with all of these immigration orders, there still is the possibility, however slim, that courts could strike them down or limit them. For example, Muslim ban legislation is still ongoing because what the Supreme Court concluded is that the president's order was likely constitutional and would not be frozen in place pending the litigation, but the litigation is still ongoing. The court case was then kicked back to the district level. And so now one of the things that we're looking at is whether or not we can prove that the government's waiver process, the exception process for the Muslim ban, is so rarely and arbitrarily used that it proves that this really is a complete ban on everyone coming in, that there is no legitimate waiver process. And if we can prove that, then that would, could go back to the Supreme Court, and that might lead them to reconsider whether or not they're going to let the Muslim ban stay in place. So, all three of these things can happen at the same time. You can continue to fight the court battle, continue to fight for legislation, and then also, continue to hope that some change will happen at the level of presidential policy, and we'll see which one gets to the finish line first, inshallah.
Hiba, did you want to add anything in addition to any of the points that Edward brought up in terms of any policy changes that he mentioned with DACA and the ban?
No, I mean, I agree with him. I think, I just think it's really ironic that the government, the current administration, who was very, very vocally against President Obama when he issued DACA as an executive order and came up with that in 2012, how the government actually, his administration was sued because he took his own, the matter into his own hands because Congress wasn't able to effectuate any legislation kind of protecting dreamers, and how that was now currently in our current situation with all these proclamations and executive orders coming out from our administration pushing forth really pretty much the same thing, except this time there is no rational connection at all. Under 212F, under the INA, there is a law giving presidential authority to allowing the president to ban individuals. There has to still be a rational reason to do so. And yes, the requirement under the law is that the president can suspend entry when entry would be detrimental to the U.S. And obviously that's where that's how he was able to push the Muslim ban forth, and also the current proclamation that we're talking about under COVID-19. But there still has to be a rational connection to the explanation or the reason the government is providing for their for whatever they're saying is detrimental to the U.S. And obviously currently we can easily see that there is a detrimental effect that COVID-19 is having, but the Muslim ban national security concern never came forth. And that is something that we can continue to challenge, given the fact that like Edward mentioned, the waiver, the exceptions aren't really being applied the way that the administration claimed it would be. And so this isn't a national security concern. This is simply discrimination in by law. So really, I think continuing to challenge them on a small scale, and and hopefully seeing it continue to go up, and just questioning the authority of the president to come up with orders that really have no basis in rationale and rational basis in policy that will actually help solve problems, and rather than create them. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more legislation to come.
And one final question. Both of you have noted uh, presidential authority and legislative authority, executive authority sort of expanding over the last two administrations. How concerned are we about this expansion, both from an immigration front in terms of litigation and also on the policy front in terms of CARES work? And is it only the executive expansion of authority that we're concerned about, or are we concerned about how this is also manifested in xenophobia has manifested itself at the legislature as well?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, concern is not only what President Trump, does, but what kind of legacy he leaves behind. That is, whenever he leaves office, what kind of judges have been left behind, and what is their understanding of immigration law, what kind of damage has already been done to families that cannot be repaired. What do states do? I mean, even if President Trump leaves office next year or 4 years from now, and CARE is nonpartisan, by the way. But whenever he leaves, what do states do? Does the movement he has created, this anti-immigrant movement, that not created, but this anti-immigrant movement he has harnessed and charged up, does it continue at the state level with governors and state legislators trying to impose new anti-immigrant restrictions, which you fought against, year after year here in Georgia, Mortiza, with other civil rights groups? Do we see more of that? So I'm more so worried about the legacy that's left behind, how long all of these policies will outlast him, how long this movement will last beyond him. And it seems like it could last for, some time.
Right. I again, I agree 100%. I feel like the harm that we are seeing, yes, the administration under the, authority of the executive branch, they do have a lot of power, especially when it comes to immigration. It's pretty much unlimited, but that doesn't mean that we can't continue to question and push. And we've seen that actually work. Litigation works. It's just that we have to question not just the law, but also the rhetoric, because that's unfortunately causing a lot more harm. Sometimes even without anything backing it up, just the rhetoric alone, without any legal, authority backing it up, is harmful, and we've seen the effects it has on our communities. So, I mean, I think Brother Edward said, the legacy is what we worry about the most, because as much as we know we have a constitution that we can fight for, there is, people will follow the leader, and our leader is not leading. And unfortunately, we are seeing the effects of that when people, find that they are empowered to discriminate and, take action and treat their neighbors unkindly and fire people because of religious reasons or just blatant racism. I mean, we see how it trickles down and affects, each of us on an individual level. And so that's the concern that I think we see, not just as immigration lawyers or attorneys in general, but just as humans and citizens of this country.
And I mean, in Georgia, we have such an exceptional immigrant population scattered throughout the state. We've seen in this state, which has such a rich history of immigration, a lot of legislative measures that are anti-immigrant in nature and would be in practice. We've been fighting, CARE Georgia, along with our partners, have been fighting against these types of legislation over the last few sessions, but there's been an increase in them ever since this type of rhetoric emerged in the 2015 and 2016 election cycles. So we'll continue to do that. That's my one positive note for the community. I'd ask both of you just to give one last message to the community, something positive that we can say that this is something we can fight for. This is something that we are all together in for. Either of you, whoever's free to start first.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll say that, alhamdulillah, take some reassurance in the fact that you've got people like Hiba Ghalib, Cook Immigration Partners, CARE Georgia, all these many other civil rights groups and activists, who are out there making sure to push back against the policies, to help people, get people the information they need, and, inshallah, be there to serve and help people. So with the difficulty comes relief, as Allah promises in the Quran. With the difficulty comes relief. So inshallah, we'll have relief from these difficulties, the situations. Inshallah, we just have to be patient and to fight the good fight for as long as we have to. And alhamdulillah, we've got people out there on the battlefield of the court of law and the court of public opinion doing that.
Yeah, I'm assured by that too. I think one lesson that I think I really I derived from this whole pandemic is how, as powerful as we are, we were taken down by a virus that we can't even see. Our lives and what we think separates us from one another, whether it's race, religion, nationality, that really doesn't matter at the end of the day. And so we have to focus on the fact that we're all in this together, and really let's get to know one another and hopefully try to understand the other's perspective, and not to feel defeated and feel victimized constantly, even if it does tend to seem that we are, subject to, being victimized. I think we have to focus on the fact that we still have a voice. We can vote, we can sue, we can be friends with our neighbors and share with them. And I think this is sometimes really what matters the most, is the small things that we can do, and on an individual level. And so I feel heartened that, we are empowered, and really just as a virus doesn't discriminate, we shouldn't either. And so, we need to support one another and hopefully empower and educate one another and tackle these myths that Murtaza, you pointed out. Immigrants don't take people's jobs. They aren't taking up, using up healthcare resources that we don't have. We need to really understand, educate one another about, the reality of the situation, and really try to all collectively come up with ways to resolve these problems together in a more holistic approach.
Thank you so much, Hiba and Edward, for joining us. I know I'm empowered every time I speak with both of you, both individually and professionally, hearing the work, Hiba, that you're doing with CUC, and then Edward, that you're continuing to do with CARE National. CARE Georgia is lucky to have such friends by our sides, one a preeminent immigration attorney and the other one of the preeminent civil rights attorneys here in Georgia. Thank you so much for joining us. I've been empowered and inspired by our discussion, and I hope our community has as well.
Thank you for all the work you guys do. You're amazing.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair. Good to see you both.
Good to see you. Happy Mother's Day early for anyone who's celebrating tomorrow, and to your families as well. Thank you for joining us. Assalamu alaikum. We'll see you next time.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.